Welcome back to Our Walking Christ. My voice is almost back, so hey, we're sounding not too bad. If I have the occasional high spike, my apologies. But today we are continuing on our discussion of the prophets with a new 3-part mini-series within the prophet series on the book of Habakkuk. And in the book of Habakkuk, we will be talking about God will judge this nation. Before we get into that, we are going to let you know again about the website and the newsletter and things like that. So I did send out a newsletter this week. So if you are on the newsletter list, you got the introduction to the next book that is coming out. We finished the first draft last night. I need to do a couple more past drafts, and then we are going to start doing a beta read for it. So stay tuned for that information. We'll have information on the next newsletter on that. We'll probably select our beta readers soon. Beta readers will get a copy of the book when it comes out, either audio or print or ebook. Of course, Patreon and Think Life Media subscribers will be able to get the digital versions of the book as part of your membership if you are $5 a month or over. But you can head on over to the website there, and we'll put the newsletter. I don't know if I'm actually going to link this newsletter on social media because it contains the introduction to the book. But it is going to set to re-queue, so anybody who adds themselves to the newsletter will get that in their inbox soon. So from that, let's go ahead and move on and talk about Habakkuk. So we need to get into the history of Habakkuk first. And what we want to do, looking at it, is we want to look at, first and foremost, what was going on. So Habakkuk preached in the period contemporary to Jeremiah at the end of Josiah's reign and at the first bouts of exile. So Josiah, you'll remember, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, he finds the book of the law, and then he starts implementing the things that God wanted for the nation. And because of what Josiah did, God told him through his prophet, I think it was Hilkiah, that I am not going to judge the nation in your lifetime because you have humbled yourself before me. And that is something you want to keep in mind. Now, what happened then is Josiah gets caught up in the middle of, we just finished talking through Nahum, and Nahum, of course, is the destruction of Nineveh, which is beginning the fall of the Assyrian Empire. Well, at this period of time, Assyria was actually aligned itself with Judah, and Egypt came up against Babylon. Josiah got in the way. I think Egypt came up against Assyria. Josiah got in the way. Josiah was wounded and killed in the battle by Necho, Pharaoh of Egypt. And at that time, he had a worthless, godless son take over. And I don't even have the list of what his name is because he only reigned for 3 months. And then after that, he dies. Actually, I think he's carried away by Egypt. They basically humble him, and then they place his other son, Jehoiakim, in place. And you remember that Jehoiakim is the one that Jeremiah is warning Jehoiakim that you need to humble yourself before God. God's going to destroy you. And Jehoiakim was reading the scroll of Jeremiah in his letters he's written, tearing them off and throwing them in the fire of his winter home. Needless to say, that was not pleasing to God. And so what happens in the middle of all of this is God begins the turmoil in the nation that's going to be the final fall, leading to the Babylonian exile of Judah and Jerusalem. So we're going to go ahead and start in with Habakkuk 1:1-4. The oracle which Habakkuk the prophet saw. How long, O God, will I call for help, and you will not hear? I cry out to you violence, and yet you do not save. Why do you make me see iniquity and cause me to look on wickedness? Yes, destruction and violence are before me. Strife exists and contention arises. Therefore, the law is ignored, and justice is never upheld. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, justice comes out perverted. So what's going on here is Habakkuk is seeing the destruction. So he sees the great reform in the time of Josiah. He sees God's blessing restored to the nation, and then he watches Josiah die and his godless sons start going over and really turning the nation back towards the old idolatry. He's bothered by the sin that he sees around him. And in our world, we can see this happening now. The period of time here in America and in the West where we had a culture that was godly. We had a culture that understood who God was. We understood basic concepts of righteousness. We understood basic concepts of justice. This has all been cast aside. Of course, Ron DeSantis just kicked out it was an attorney general or one of the district attorneys. It was one of those. He just went in and fired the guy because he comes out and says, I am not going to prosecute and uphold the laws of the state of Florida. He says, no, you can't do that. He fires him, appoints somebody else the same day, and he's done. That's one state in our nation. The vast majority of our nation, criminals over and over and over. There's a report of one guy was robbed 23 times by the same exact criminal. It's like, what's going on? We do not have justice in this country anymore. And it has nothing to do with white and black. It has to do with crime-fulfilling thugs roaming the streets. Just this last week, there was like some flat out brawl. I think it was in New York City, like fist fights between a mob and police. It was like, what is going on in this world? But nobody wants to stand up and actually enforce the laws. And this is the type of thing we start see happening. And when our society starts degrading to this point, okay, a 10-year-old girl is raped by an illegal immigrant, like it's an incestual type thing. She needs to get an abortion. And we're not all concerned about a 10-year-old needing an abortion from an illegal immigrant. No, we're worried about a 10-year-old has to cross a state line. I'm sorry, corruption has reached the depth of insanity in this country. And if we are not careful in this country, we are going to be judged by God. And that is exactly what Habakkuk sees around him. And he calls out to God. God, what is going on? Now, of course, we all in American Christianity, and this is one of the problems with American Christianity, is we're so focused on all the good. Oh, it's just God is love and God is peace and all this kind of stuff. But have a look at what God's response is. This is God responding to him. Habakkuk 1:5 through 11. Look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I'm about to do something in your days. You would not believe it, even if you were told. Behold, I'm rising up the Chaldeans. Now you see the word Chaldeans, that's the Babylonians. The fierce and impetuous people who march through the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs. They are dreaded and feared. Their justice and authority originate with themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards and keener than wolves in the evening. Their horsemen come galloping. Their horsemen come from far away. They fly like an eagle, swooping down to devour. All of them come for violence. Their horde of the faces moves forward. They collect captives like sand. They mock at kings and rulers and are a laughing matter to them. They laugh at every fortress and heap rubble upon to capture it. They will sweep through like the winds and pass on, but they will be held guilty, they whose strength is their God. So God is telling him in this part here that he is rising up these Chaldeans to destroy the sinful Israelites. When a society reaches a point of evil, decadence, we have no choice but to have a reformation like Josiah, or a hostile takeover like the Northern Kingdom experienced. We either have to come to this point in this country and have a reformation, or we are going to be destroyed. Have a look at the training videos. Go online and do a search. I meant to pull them up and I completely forgot until right now. But China, Russia, these two nations are doing training videos that are showing man's men doing amazing things, preparing for war, preparing for battle. In the United States, we're doing PSAs about gender pronouns and effeminizing the military and wanting to talk about pregnancy suits for Air Force pilots. What in the world is going on? We all talk in this country. It's like China and or Russia, depending on the day, is the boogeyman. Ooh, those bad Russians. Ooh, those bad Chinans. But what if God right now is rising up China or rising up Russia to destroy this nation? Because we have collapsed on our own decadence. We're refusing to prosecute crime in the streets. We're more concerned that a 10-year-old girl has to get an abortion by crossing state lines than we are an illegal immigrant actually impregnating a 10-year-old girl. We have serious problems in this nation. We are so screwed up. You cannot go into a public school and sit there and say, you're a man, therefore you are he, him. No. It's I'm banana and banana self is my pronoun. We are so screwed up in this nation that we are falling under our decadence. In fact, there was a documentary a while back. I know there was an older version available on YouTube. There was a newer version released, and I forget the guy in it. I reference it in my book, I Am Not Amused. Fascinating, one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. It was called Decadence. I think it's Decadence, Decline of Nations or something like that. It followed through how nations rise up, reach this point of decadence and collapse under their own weight. And then it pulled in a lot of the elements that we see inside of our nation today. And the decadence is reaching it. And we are at this point where we are either going to have a reformation back to basic common decency, justice, peace, science, and truth, or we are going to be handed over to other nations, which may or may not be more evil than ourselves. If you knew the things sometimes China did with people, you want to declare America as a racist nation? China harvests organs from black people, folks, simply because they're black. We are not a racist nation. We had a black president who was duly elected, had 2 terms. Whether you like the guy or didn't like the guy, there's some possible shenaniganery. I don't know. At least the very first time he was elected, I think it was a duly elected president. I don't see any system issues with that. Second one, I wouldn't specifically doubt it. We are not a racist nation. But we're trying to be race baited because anything it takes to divide us, race bait us there, race bait us into Republican and Democrat, bait us into man and woman or non-binary and all this. Isn't it funny that we're trying to polarize the nation, but we're not, have no binaries? It's kind of weird. But understand, this is what happened right at the very beginning of the days of Josiah. 2 Kings 22, 8 through 10. Then Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the scribe, I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. And Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan, who read it. And Shaphan the scribe came to the king and brought back the word and said, your servants has emptied the money out was found in the house and have delivered it into the hands of the workmen who have oversight of the house of the Lord. Moreover, Shaphan the scribe told the king, Hilkiah the priest had been given me a book. And Shaphan read it in the presence of the king. And you'll remember from that point in time, Josiah repented. He humbled himself. And he caused great reformations of the kingdom. I have a whole book on this called Josiah's Sanctification. It is about the sanctification of the nation of Israel and how what Josiah did pushed on God's plans for wrath and destruction. They would have been destroyed if Josiah had not humbled himself. We're not going to read all of the sections in there, but what we have to understand is that those reforms were not long-lasting. He reformed the nation, but his children did not agree. So in his son's days, 2 Kings 23, 26 through 27, however, the Lord did not return from his fierceness of his great wrath, which his anger burned against Judah, because of all the provocations which Manasseh, that was Josiah's grandfather, had provoked him. The Lord said, I will remove Judah also from my sight, as I have removed Israel, and I will cast off Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen, and the temple which I said, my name shall be there. We have people running around saying, America is God's nation. No. America has collapsed under its decadence. We have abandoned basic science of male and female. We've abandoned basic justice and decency. We allow criminals in the streets. We want to talk about border walls between Russia and Ukraine, but we will not secure our own borders at the bottom. We have collapsed as a nation. We have collapsed as a nation. Now, I do find it telling that from that part that we read, let me go back to that part there in the verse 5 in Habakkuk. Look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am going to do something in your days. You would not believe it if you were told. Well, that's exactly what Paul says here in Acts 13:38-43. Therefore, let it be known to you, brethren, that through him forgiveness of sins is proclaimed to you, and through him everyone who believes is freed from all things from which you could not be freed from the law of Moses. Therefore, take heed that the things spoken of the prophets may not come upon you. Behold, the scoffers and marvel and perish. I am accomplishing a work in your days, a work which you will never believe, though someone should describe it to you. As Paul and Barnabas were going out, the people kept begging that these things might be spoken to them the next Sabbath. Now among the meeting of the synagogue had broken up, many of the Jews and God-fearing proselytes followed Paul and Barnabas, who speaking to them were urging them to continue to in the grace of God. So, of course, Paul always goes into the Jewish synagogue when he first gets into a city, because the gospel first is to the Jews. But then they would cast him out, and he'd be like, no, your blood is now on your head. Now, the people who believed him would follow him, and they would start their own thing. But this began what Paul would speak against the Pharisees, who were saying that Paul was violating God's law. In reality, they were. They were the ones who did. Now, there is good news here eventually, but sadly not necessarily in this chapter of this book. But have a look at the ending of chapter 1 and the first verse of chapter 2, which wraps up the thought. I think when they separated out the chapters, they kind of missed this spot. That chapter 2, verse 1 kind of belongs to the previous thought. Are you not from everlasting, O my God, O holy? We will not die, O Lord, have appointed them to judge, and you, O rock, have established them to correct. Your eyes are too pure to approve evil, and you cannot look on wickedness with favor. Why do you look with favor on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they? Why have you made men like fish of the sea, like creeping things without a ruler over them? The Chaldeans bring all of them up with a hook, drag them away with their net, and gather them together in their fishing net. Therefore, they rejoice and are glad. Therefore, they offer a sacrifice to their net and burn incense to their fishing net, because through these things their catch is large and their food is plentiful. Will they therefore empty their net and continually slay the nations without sparing? I will stand on my guard post and station myself on the rampart, and I will keep watch to see what he will speak to me and how I may reply when I am reproved. The Chaldeans were worse than the Israelites. Just like maybe China is worse than us. Russia, I don't know. Can't say for sure. So Habakkuk does not understand using them for judgment. We may not understand if God raises up some of these other nations to judge us for our decline. We are the place the scriptures are lawfully allowed to be used. And we are the place with more false churches than anywhere in the world. What we need in America is a good old-fashioned prosecution. Then all these false Christians will be chased away from the church. We'll be left with a pure seed free of the leaven of evil. God is going to answer. What Habakkuk says at the very end here is, I'm going to wait and see what happens. All right, God, you're in control. I'm kind of going to wait to see what happens. Because there is always a remnant. Even if our nation is destroyed by other nations because of our decadence and the way we have declined, even if that happens, a remnant of this nation will remain. It's not going to be a remnant of American nation. It's going to be a remnant of Christians left here who agree with the general principles of freedom and love and peace. It's going to be us who manage to keep ourselves away from the giant wars, who manage to continue preaching the gospels, not getting caught up in everything, but helping spread the word of God. The reality is, Habakkuk sees that this is not total annihilation, but a correction for the people. This is very similar to those who died in the desert. Remember, after fleeing Egypt, Numbers 14:20-25, the Lord said, I have pardoned them according to your word, but indeed, as I live, all the earth will be filled with the glory of the Lord. Surely all men who have seen my glory and my signs which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet have put me to the test these 10 times and have not listened to my voice, shall by no means see the land which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who spurned me see it, but my servant Caleb, because he had a different spirit and has followed me fully. I will bring him into the land which he now enters, and his descendants shall take possession of it. Now the Amalekites, the Canaanites live in the valleys. Turn tomorrow and set out toward the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. If you do not remember what was going on at that point, what went on is God brings them to the border of the promised land. It only took about a month or so. He brings an entire nation ready to hand them over to the people. He is ready to give the Canaanites over, restoring Israel in that generation, in Moses' generation. But Moses sends out 10 spies. It wasn't see if the land is good. It was see how to conquer it. And they all came back, and 10 of them are like, oh, we can't conquer this place. There's giants. We look like grasshoppers. Of course, it says here only Caleb, but remember, it's Caleb and Joshua. Joshua's leading them over. Caleb is the only non-leader for surviving for this generation. So what God tells them is, you have listened to these yellow-bellied fools who thought their mission was to determine if they should take it. And they said, no, we can't take this land. Well, what's your plan? Go back to Egypt? God has a plan. Even though we are already at the foot, we're going to turn back in the desert for 40 years. Well, your entire generation falls dead in the desert. And he says, after 40 years, I'm going to bring you back, and your children are going to conquer the land. That's what's going on here. And that's like us. If we do not take a stand for righteousness and peace and justice, we are going to collapse under the decadence of our own selves. We will be cast out. God will destroy us. As a nation, do we stand? Or do we say, as Job said, the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens the counsels by words without knowledge? Now gird up your loins like a man. I will ask you, and you will instruct me. See, Job got it. Habakkuk got it faster than Job. Habakkuk sees the Babylonians as so evil, he does not understand why God would use them, but still he trusts in God. Remember, this from Job took something like 30 to 50 questions from God. God had to humble him. Finally, he looks up, he's like, I don't know, man. But God's like, you're going to listen, boy. Now, there are some principal lessons we can learn here. Obviously, we focused a lot on the world politics and the world stage right now, because I got news for you. No politician is going to solve our problems right now. We're not going to overcome this very easily. That's for sure. But here's a few lessons. Number one, when the culture becomes so terribly corrupted as America has become, we have to reform our nation, or we have to be destroyed. This is the only thing we can do as a nation to curtail God's judgment on this nation. Our task has to be to reform ourselves. We have to kick out every DA in this nation who will not prosecute criminals. We have to go back and recognize the broken window effect. We prosecute small crimes, the big crimes are going to vanish. We have to get drugs off the streets. We have to stop catering to a people who wants to give everything for free and give nothing in return. We have to reform our nation and return to the basic principle moralities of God, of justice and peace. We have to learn how to get along with people we do not necessarily agree with, and that's okay. Unfortunately, we're disagreeing about killing babies in the streets and the ability to defend ourselves with force when DAs are not prosecuting dangerous criminals. We have serious problems, and our only hope is for God to judge us. Number two, though, is that God is gracious, and he always leaves a way out. He always leaves a remnant with the judgment. If this nation is judged by another nation, a remnant of good, calm Christians is going to remain to reseat it. Unless this is the end in which God will take us all away and destroy the nations with wrath. That is another option. And principle three is that God will use something more evil to accomplish his will. We're going to sit back and say, but we're better than those nations, and we do it all the time. We're better than China. We're better than Russia. Yeah, except we're weakening our military while they're strengthening theirs. God may very well judge them. The only hope for this nation in the sense of a foreign invader is if we as a nation are allowed to have guns, because I got news for you. If it comes down to a world, it is funny because there are some rumblings about China's going to invade, and I'm not sure I completely agree with any of that. I would love to see it, though. China goes over and takes California because basically California has been disarmed. And like, say America's weak. And then they're going to cross the border and land in Arizona and get gunned down by grandmas with AK-47s. I know, I was in church with some of you. Arizona's not disarmed. I got news for you. A drunk redneck has better aim than a Chinese soldier. All right. And that's our only nation, is that if we keep those Second Amendments in place, because we do have a constitution, which is a great document, which is in many ways connected to a lot of godly principles. Now, do we always fight? In a holy war, we don't. I talked about this in detail on a video. If it's a matter of fighting over matters of our God, no, we surrender. We give up. But if it's a matter of a social war and things like that, or a criminal or a thug, all these types of things, yeah, we have the right to defend ourselves. There's nothing that says we have to kowtail to a thug with a gun to our face. And I talked about this. I don't want to get much here because I had it very well detailed out with scripture verses in a previous video. I'll go ahead and link here. But these are the lessons. Habakkuk can teach us a lot of things, because if we do not reform ourselves, that's the stuff that's happening to us. Well, with that being said, I'm going to just, we'll just kind of leave it here. You can head on back over onto the website over at ourwalkinchrist.com for more information. I mentioned several different books today. I mentioned Josiah's Sanctification. I mentioned I Am Not Amused. There's 2 books available over on the website at ourwalkinchrist.com. They're available anywhere also online you'd buy books. If you have an account somewhere else you like to buy your books from, you can find them over there. With that, thanks for watching, everybody, and I hope that you enjoy your daily walk in our Lord.